This is episode 3 of our mental health series. This is one that is called Walk With. So as you know, we did Let's Talk last series. So if you haven't watched any of those, if you haven't listened to any of those, they're available on all of the platforms that you can think of. They're available on all of that. So go back and look. But we had first 2 episodes, it was Jamie and I sharing. We were sharing a little bit of our stories, a little bit of Made for More stories, and where we're at right now, I feel like I verbally overshared. I feel like I tried to get Jamie to verbally overshare, but we are not the professionals that our guest is today. So we are very excited today to have Deborah Nelson with us sitting on the chair. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We are really, really glad that you're here. Do you want to start just by sharing a little bit? You run an organisation, Impossible Mental Health. So would you share a little bit about what that is? A little bit maybe about yourself, why you got into doing what you're doing. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You share what you want to share. I chronically overshared. So, I mean, it's... The table is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so Deborah, obviously I said Impossible Mental Health was started in June 2019 and it's a private cognitive behavioural therapy practice, and we now also offer another type of therapy called EMDR. But it was started basically because I'd worked for the health service for 20 years, and during my time as a mental health nurse I had developed this real passion for cognitive behavioural therapy, because I was starting to see that lots of people were being kept in hospital or being medicated instead of dealing with the problems in the here and now. And there was a lot of puzzlement in a lot of professionals as in, like, why was this medication not working? And why, when we send them home from hospital on this high amount of medication, are they coming back in within a couple of months? And it all of a sudden started dawning on them that we aren't dealing with the real things that are going on in the home or outside and around that are causing people to have these difficulties. And of course we have a legacy here in Northern Ireland of the Troubles, and we've a lot of people who have learned to live in a particular way.
Not to talk about anything.
And whenever we, whenever we don't have that, or that's not their security blanket in a sense, then they have to find a new way of living and doing. So my passion grew for that, and unfortunately within the health service there wasn't really the space for me to explore that. So I started exploring that myself, and went on to train in cognitive behavioural therapy.
Could you just to pause there, could you explain, just for anyone who doesn't know, you might have heard cognitive behavioural therapy as CBT. But could you explain a wee bit about what that just is on the ground, just for anyone who doesn't know anything about it?
Yeah, so it's quite in simple terms, it's about how we think and how we feel and what we do, and how if we put those in a triangle, at each point of the triangle, it doesn't matter which point you start at, it will affect the other two. So if we're thinking negatively, then we're more than likely not feeling so good, and therefore probably not acting or behaving in a way that actually makes us feel any better. And so that cycle keeps on going. In CBT we learn to look at what we think, we learn to see what we're doing and see if we can change those to make us feel better, and therefore again to break that cycle and make us feel better, make us think better and more positively, and make us act and behave in a way that gives us better quality of life, I suppose.
Yeah, so it challenges those. I've already shared on the podcast, I used to really struggle with OCD. So that was the therapy I went through, was to challenge my thought patterns and create new ones. I went on that cognitive behavioural therapy, so it's brilliant. So really good. So you went on to train in that in more depth after being the nurse. So you saw the problem, you saw what was there in front of you, you saw that you couldn't actually do what you felt was the real thing to help people, to bring change to people's lives, the way that didn't use medication. So you decided to train in a different thing. And where did that bring you to inventing Impossible Mental Health? How did that come about?
So I actually had a dream one night that and it's in this area in East Belfast, that I had a building and that I had started a therapy business. I'm not a visionary, very much a completer finisher. So you give me a job, I'll do it for you, and that'll be great. So to have a dream or a vision was quite a big thing for me. And I just have a real passion that people still, maybe because of how we've lived in the past number of years, but mental health has a real stigma. And sorry, I get really emotional about this. But I just wanted to start something that starts to challenge people's perception of mental health, and of good mental health, and that it's not a sense of you're either ill or you're well, that there's actually a continuum in between, that any of us here today could be dancing along, given whatever circumstances we're in. Yeah. So my passion was to start something that was challenging mental health and potentially changing it. And the place that I knew where to start was to start by helping people change what they were thinking and what they were doing.
Yeah. So changing mental health and changing, not a small dream, no. Not a small dream that you had, like that. It's honestly, it's amazing. And I love, if you go on to your website, that you have like impossible mental health and the M is taken out, so it's just possible. And I think that it's just massive what you're doing, what your vision is. So how do you go about, so you work with a lot of children and young people, and what sort of things are you seeing at the moment? So you'd mentioned a wee bit the pandemic, a little bit about what's going on. Have you noticed any changes since the pandemic, or what sort of things are you dealing with at the moment? Are you noticing regularly within the young people?
I suppose the first sort of year of the pandemic, I didn't really notice any change in what was normally being presented. But this past 6 months, most certainly, I've seen an increase in separation anxiety, panic, health anxiety and OCD, and especially OCD, and I think the messages that the pandemic has given our young people of responsibility and fear if they do something wrong, or they don't clean in a particular way, or they don't do something, or they don't keep their distance, has created a real problem.
Yeah.
And we also, on the back of those difficulties, are seeing a lot of school refusal, which is obviously very difficult for teachers and schools to manage, because they don't understand it in terms of, I've heard it said a lot of times, people aren't, they don't look like they're distressed, or they don't look like they've got something wrong with them. So yeah, that's a few of the problems.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. I have a 2-year-old, and even when we're in the park, you see some children that will touch a slide or touch a swing, and they're like, give me the hand sanitizer, get me the hand sanitizer. But it's actually not their fault. That's just been what they're, and in that wee stage of their development, that's been so huge to them. Because normally what we say, is like a lot of what you would struggle with, it's not going to happen. Like a lot of what you're worrying about isn't going to happen. But with COVID, it has, and that's been people's reality. If they haven't, if they feel like they haven't washed their hands, or they've been in spaces that are where there's germs, they have got sick, and they've seen people die around them. They've seen loss in areas that a generation we haven't seen come through the same before. So you see children so young as 3, 4, 5, feel they need to sanitize their hands when they touch anything in the park, and that's not normal child behavior, but actually it's what we've been having to be teaching our kids for the past few years. So luckily I feel like my daughter was young enough that she didn't really get the whole COVID thing, because she was just born. So it would probably be, if it happened now, it would be different, but we were kind of out of that. But I just can't even imagine what it's like for those parents. And I know that there's a lot of parents that are listening who, just what you're describing, that's exactly what they're going through. That is their reality. That is what they're facing every single day with their children. I just hear so many stories about children not wanting to go to school, as you're saying, the school refusal being huge, parents not being able to get them out of the door, having the eating disorders coming in, OCD being massive. So everything you're explaining, I feel like we'll have a parent who on some level is like, yes, that's me. And I think the next question that they ask is, so what can I do about that? So if someone is out there, and if your child has never, I think what the pandemic has shown us is children or young people who, and even adults who had never had any tendency towards mental ill health, have, like, there's been stuff triggered within them. So maybe parents who have never even thought about this, as you've said, we come from Northern Ireland, kind of the troubles mentality, we don't talk about stuff. So if you're a parent that's had that, and suddenly you have this child who has OCD or school refusal, you're like, where do I even begin with this? So if a parent is noticing that within their child, what advice would you give? What first steps would you say for them to take?
First and foremost, do not panic. And I think there has to be a little bit of normalising, that we do have to take a look back and think about what we have come through, and then start to look at what is it that you're concerned about, what are you noticing, and depending on the age of your child, but in I suppose it doesn't matter what age, but more so you probably get more out of a teenager. But it's talking to your child. What are you afraid of? And then trying just to figure out, is this something bigger than I can deal with myself? And if it is, then you've got a couple of different options. Obviously, and I'm not sitting here completely green, if the best advice is to go and see your GP, but I know that a lot of GPs out there will probably be screaming at the podcast now, going, no, because every service is overwhelmed. But the first protocol, and whilst I'm a private company, I have to be mindful that people need to access what they can for free before going down other routes. So your GP would be the first protocol. Then you'll be telling them what your young person or your child is going through, and just as much detail as you can, like what are they, if you can get, what are they thinking and what are they doing, because normally it's what they're doing that we notice the most. When they're hiding, when you want to go outside, or when you can't get them out of the bathroom because they're washing again, or when they get really upset when you touch something that they have put in place. So probably you'll find more about what they're doing, and it's explaining to the GP that this is not their normal behaviour, and that it has come out of a fear of something, and that you want help. Most GPs will refer you into the central hubs, which will mean maybe the sort of CAM services, which again are overwhelmed. And so if you're not getting somewhere with those services, then you can access the likes of myself or other private therapists who deal with cognitive behavioural therapy. And
that might be some people's first port of call. Also just to say, it's obviously there's free services, but then there's the non-aspect. A lot of the free services, as you're saying, have massive waiting lists of years, to be honest, at the moment. So it is, you can first port of call be.
It can be, of course, and often I'll ask that question, have you spoken to anybody before this? And but there doesn't have to be a diagnosis for anybody to come and see me. I see a range of disorders, and so therefore reaching out and emailing me or filling out the inquiry form on the website or giving me a quick call, that can be the easiest step.
And that is that, I mean, and it's sometimes by the time that they've actually got to, I know with my clients, by the time sometimes parents call me, they've actually been through the hardest parts, and because they've been through all of the things, and sometimes they just don't really know where to go, or having someone on the other end of the phone to say, like, your child's not abnormal, like, this is actually very common. They're like, really? Like, thank you for saying that. They're like, we feel like we're the only people in this, completely alone. And so we just want to tell you parents out there, you're absolutely not alone. And we want to work with your kids. There's a thing, and Impossible Mental Health, like what you're doing is phenomenal. So we would highly recommend what you're doing. And so reaching out, but obviously you reach out, you get your therapy. So as a parent, so you'll obviously work with the child and stuff, but as a parent, if you have a child who's struggling, or maybe you're a teacher, or maybe you're even in the hospital profession, and you keep seeing people, no matter what area you work with young people in, but you keep seeing them struggling, could you give maybe some advice, some tips for people who are walking alongside these young people or children? These children or young people, and like what sort of things practically would you say you're doing? So they've got to the stage where these tips aren't going to help them in the long run to get better, but they're already going to counselling, they're going to therapy, they've seen their GP, whatever that looks like first, and then they would look like, okay, so what would you say to do alongside that as to build the safe environment kind of in the home, or as the constant access to the young person?
I suppose a lot of us look for reassurance, and unfortunately in CBT we don't give too much of that. I was told a couple of days ago that I was quite brutal with my boundaries on that, but as a parent, or even as a teacher or a professional, you want to give somebody reassurance that everything is going to be okay. But reassurance isn't just about saying you're going to be okay, especially in the circumstances like health anxiety or OCD, or many forms of anxiety. Your reassurance can come in forms of colluding with it. So if it's, have I washed my hands enough times? Oh, yes, you've washed your hands. Yes, I can see your hands are clean enough. But the problem is the young person will go, no, I'm not, and go back to doing it again. So if you aren't putting those things in place, like if you haven't already started offering reassurance, don't start it. It's a really tough thing. Like, I'm sitting here as a parent and, I have to try not to at times saying it's all going to be okay. So not adding in reassurance if it's not already there. And starting to help your child challenging those beliefs a wee bit. Now, obviously, the way I work in my therapy is that a parent or carer or whoever the young person wants is generally invited in for the last 10 or so minutes of the session, given the caveat that the young person has given permission
Actually
for
wants that, yeah.
And obviously our teenagers sometimes don't necessarily want that. But it's about, we agree then at the end of the session, so what are you going to do and what as a parent are you going to do?
That's brilliant.
So that means that everybody's on the same sheet, because a lot of people think, oh yes, the child or young person is your client, and that is absolutely true. But I'm kind of working a wee bit more, I suppose, systemically, in the sense that I'm working with a wider picture, because no young person became the way they were on their own, and they won't get changed, or things won't change for them unless that same body of people and support network help them. So I would be being as involved as you can, as your young person will allow. Don't panic again. Keep talking, and don't offer reassurance. But also don't withdraw it if you're already given it until your therapist gives you the signal to do that.
Because your young person will be like, oh, suddenly it's awful.
And then everybody hates me. And then that's it done for. So being sort of just mindful that the reason why they're looking for reassurance is because their brain is constantly spitting out these negative thoughts of, you can't do that, you're doing that wrong, this isn't right. And they look to the people who they trust the most, who give them unconditional love and say, give me some hope here. And as a parent, it's hard not to go, yeah, it's all okay. It's okay. But actually, if we can refrain a little bit from doing that.
That's brilliant. That's really, really good advice. And I love the fact that you bring the family unit in, because whenever I was a teenager, as I said, with OCD, with anxiety, panic, I was very sick. But I probably felt that the people, like my kind of support network, and it was their way, because even like whenever I was at school, like there was no talk of anxiety. I didn't know I had anxiety, never mind OCD. I only realized I had that way later. But so like my parents they spent money and sent me to all these incredible professionals. But what we would all probably say now is, if we could all have just talked about it, but they didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was experiencing. I didn't have language. So I love the fact that you bring the family in, and I love the fact that you give that advice. Talk about it, like leave an open space. Don't react whenever, especially if it's OCD things, and whenever they tell you some of the behaviors that they're doing or some of the thoughts they're having, don't do big reactions. Even though in your head you might be like, what? Like, how did we get here? But don't do that. Just sit in that environment and just allow them to speak and allow them to share. Because I feel like if I had that, I was like kind of sent to the professional, and then I came back into my family, and it just wasn't spoken about. It was as if all the work was happening over here, but it wasn't transferred, just because a lack of me knowing, them knowing. So I actually love the fact that you bridge that gap between family and young person. I really, really love that.
Yeah, there's also just something like this come into my head, and I really think it's a really important message for parents considering to send their young people to a therapist, and also for young people to hear, is that you're not coming to the therapist to be fixed. And the first parent that says that when they come in the door to me, I'm very clear and like, I'm not here to fix. I'm here to help, in inverted commas, but actually I'm here to support. And the journey is not going to be me running along in front of your young person or your whoever it is and pulling them through the journey. I'm also not going to be going behind them and giving them a bit in the backside. Keep going. I'm going to be walking alongside them. So it's about not, and if the parents can get alongside as opposed to going into the dialogue of, you need fixed, you need help, because that just puts people further down, which then further feeds into the negative thinking, which further feeds into the anxiety provoking behaviours to try and fix that situation.
Absolutely. And Jamie and I actually talked about in the last podcast how only we are responsible for ourselves. And if we are going to see change within our own lives, within our behaviours, we actually need to do that. I had so many years as a teenager being sent to probably these amazing professionals, I got nothing because I just sat there like, no, I'm fine. And I very much wasn't fine, but I wasn't willing to do the work. And I didn't see the change until I decided I wanted to see change and I wanted to do the work. And that's when, like, the therapist I was with was amazing. But to be honest, it probably could have been anyone because I was willing to do that. I'd built the support system around me. I had all the kind of stuff in place. So I think all of that is brilliant, and how you're bridging the gap, and that is really good. But you're so right. You aren't there to fix anyone. You're there to walk alongside a journey with these people as they would want to do that. So thank you, Deborah. That is amazing. So Impossible Mental Health, check it out. Get in touch with her. You can phone call, your number's on the website, or you can fill in the inquiry form. So please check that out. But thank you, Deborah, for coming here today and being willing to share with us and be willing to come on our podcast. And we hope that has brought a little bit of hope to you. We hope if you're a parent or a teacher, or if you work with young people in any sort of a way, we hope that has been able to bring a little bit of hope to your situation, and some tools as well of how to walk alongside someone. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will be back next week.